The Penguins slump reaches 6 games. I'm Matt Gajtka. This is Penguins Postgame on Pittsburgh Hockey Now and also the National Hockey Now YouTube channel. Thanks again for joining me for a show in about a week. So last time I talked to you was actually a pretty heartening performance against the Calgary Flames up in Calgary. But ever since then, 3 games played and no points for the Pens, including tonight as their old pal Marc-André Fleury shuts them down in the end. He makes a couple of flourishes, appropriately enough, at the end of his final Pittsburgh appearance, and he gets the number 1 star, takes a victory lap at the end of the game. I guess not quite the unadulterated feel-good story that Malkin's 500th goal was a couple of weeks ago, but if you are a Penguins fan of any kind of vintage beyond a few years, you can certainly appreciate what tonight meant, even though it wasn't Fleury's first time back. It was actually his 4th game in Pittsburgh against the Penguins since he left the franchise in the expansion draft of 2017, going off to Vegas. Now 2 teams later, after he went through Chicago and now on to Minnesota for a final season. He pays one last visit to PPG Paints Arena, and he wasn't perfect, but he was good enough to get the win. And doesn't that describe the career of Marc-André in a nutshell? I think it certainly does. The second winningest goalie in league history. You'll never say he was one of the top 3 goalies in a given season, with the exception maybe of his Vezina year, the expansion year for Vegas 2017-18. But he was always in the top 10 reliably, and he was durable, and he kept it going, basically, even through some struggles with the mental side of the game, some struggles with the technique side of the game. Got it shored up, and then he got pushed out in Pittsburgh by Matt Murray, and just the circumstances of the salary cap more than anything. I don't necessarily pin that decision on Jim Rutherford too much. I think in a lot of ways his bed was made for him, and I'm just happy that Fleury has had a full career even beyond his Pittsburgh years, although selfishly I would have preferred that he continued on and played his entire career in Pittsburgh, and I think he'd still be the Penguins' best goalie as of the looks of things right now. And if that isn't an indictment of how the Penguins have developed that position, I don't know what is. Well, the Penguins are in a big hole now. They're 3-7-1. I mentioned their slump hit 6 games. They've gotten just 1 point over that stretch. So they've had regulation losses to, in order, Carolina, Winnipeg, Edmonton, Vancouver, and now Minnesota. Of course, all but one of those against Western Conference opposition. So they're not losing points to the East directly, but they are losing points in general. And the 1 point they got against Calgary, even that one had some stink on it because they blew a late lead. And isn't this remarkable? The Penguins have played 11 games so far, and they have had at least a 1-goal lead, if not greater, in 9 of those 11 games. And in 7 of those 9 games, they've given up those leads and lost. In another one of the games, in fact, they gave up the lead. That was against Buffalo, but still won in overtime. So they have followed a familiar pattern. They have been able to put some goals on the board, but I think that's now 7 straight games with at least 4 goals allowed. I suppose you can put an asterisk by that one because the game in Calgary, they gave up 3, and then the 4th one was the shootout tally, not really a goal. But at any rate, the defense is certainly the missing link right now for the Penguins. You could pin it on some goaltending, and again, a soft goal goes in tonight to help the Wild rally. Joel Blomqvist, otherwise solid, but not as good as we've seen him. He let that short side goal go in with really no space between him and the post. You could say unlucky. You could also say, well, don't leave it up to luck. You want to make sure you seal off that post completely, and Blomqvist did not. So we've got about a half an hour coming up for you. We've got comments coming your way, if you dare. See, we do have quite a few live viewers right now, as I don't think the Penguins have lost your interest. I think they are still certainly top of mind for hockey fans. We're only 11 games into an 82-game season, so if you're bailing right now, boy, you might have to find another sport to track the rest of the way here, or find another team if that's the case. But this Penguin squad, which came into the year, I think, with modest expectations, I'm not sure I expected them to seriously challenge for a playoff spot, certainly not for any kind of serious Stanley Cup contention. Well, this start of the year, I suppose, has gone like we thought it might, but I didn't think they would look this shoddy defensively, and I didn't think that we would see this many holes in their game. So it's been difficult so far. It's been a serious challenge to find some positives. Tonight, though, I will say I didn't mind the Crosby-Malkin compilation. When was the last time we saw them play a full game together? I couldn't think of it. I don't even think it happened very often at all back in their early days. For a while, it was the so-called nuclear option for Michel Therrien and Dan Bylsma, but Mike Sullivan has been rather loath to pair those two together outside of power play situations. But I think he's looking at his roster and saying this is our best chance to generate some offense. And to that line's credit, they did create 2 even-strength goals tonight. Not a lot of power play time, and in the end, the Penguins' lack of discipline in the third period short-circuited their comeback attempt because Raquel scored, and I felt like the Wild were looking a bit vulnerable. And like I mentioned, Lars Eller had a good chance late in the game. A loose puck was cleared off the goal line in the final couple of minutes as well before Kirill Kaprizov sealed it. But the Penguins were shorthanded for a solid 5 to 6 minutes in the middle portion of that third period, and it was just frustrating to watch to see them try to come back, but it's hard to come back when you're playing shorthanded and especially down by a couple of men, which we saw on 2 separate occasions. Blomqvist and the penalty killers stepped up. Still just not a lot of time left at the end to do much of anything, even though they were just down the 1 goal. And this Penguins team has shown some offensive explosiveness, but at the same time, they've just given up way too many goals to make that count. And to get beyond the 3-win mark at this stage, they're lurking near now the bottom of the Eastern Conference. Coming into the night, they were right there with the Blue Jackets. Surprisingly, the Blue Jackets holding up well in the early going, despite all the tragedy that surrounds them with the death of Johnny Gaudreau. But the Blue Jackets are now a couple of points up on the Penguins, who are tied with the Flyers for dead last in the Metro Division and also dead last in the Eastern Conference. The only team behind them in the entire league, actually, is the San Jose Sharks, who just picked up a miraculous win last night at Utah, 5-4, scoring 3 times in the final 5 minutes. Otherwise, they'd still be winless. But outside of the Sharks, who are maybe not necessarily tanking this year, but they're looking like they're gunning for yet another high draft pick. They're certainly in the rebuild mode. The Penguins, you could argue, are quickly falling to that level. They're tied with the Predators, who are very disappointing, and the Blackhawks, who are, again, one of those rebuilding teams at the bottom of the standings. So they've got a long climb to go to even get back to relevance at the season's midway point. I think that's a good goal, just to get there by, say, Christmas break, get to a point where you say they're not completely out of it. But then again, if you're trying to flip players for assets, if that's your plan, if that's or at least the backup plan, if you're out of contention, then maybe it's for the best that they are just undoubtedly out of contention, and there's no ambiguity to it. Thanks again for everyone for watching tonight. I know it's been a tough stretch. Truth Simplified has a comment. He says, I think it's going to be a long season. It's already felt like a long season, only 3 weeks into the year. This feels like the pre-Crosby era when Mario was still playing. I think there is a similarity there beyond just the results. And you'll recall the first year after the lockout, the Penguins had high expectations. I believe they went winless in their first 9, where they 0-5-4, something like that, in Crosby's first year. This season feels like that, in the utter inability to keep the opponent off the board, the utter disorganization. And of course, that year didn't end very well for Eddie Olczyk as head coach. He only made it to mid-December before Michel Therrien was brought in from Wilkes-Barre Scranton. And for the longest time, I thought there's no way they fire Mike Sullivan this year, no matter how bad the season goes, just because expectations are low. But I don't know if they're this low. And the utter lack of cohesion with the way this team is playing leads me to believe that timeline for Sullivan, if there ever was one, toward his eventual firing, and every coach gets fired, right? I'm not being morbid or callous by saying this. That's just the reality of pro sports. And Sullivan is in his 10th season with the Penguins. But just with how bad the team looks, I think it's certainly a possibility that Kyle Dubas and the ownership group, Fenway Sports Group, which has been so effusive in their praise of Mike Sullivan, Tom Werner on down, they may have to rethink things if the trajectory of this season continues to be strictly downward and sharply downward at the moment. Excuse me there. Getting a dry mouth here at the end of the day, and it's not just from my mouth being agape at how many defensive errors the Penguins we're making. You look back to the start of this game, not the best start for the Pens, but they do get the first 2 goals. Let's not forget about that in this 5-3 loss. It's easy to forget because the Wild certainly made up their deficit in a hurry. They got a couple of goals within a minute. And again, it's not just one goal the Penguins are giving up. It's back-to-back goals. It was 3 in a row, actually 4 in a row in Vancouver. It was 4 in a row tonight as well. The 4 in Vancouver were within a 5-minute span. There were 3 in 1 minute. So they're not just conceding. They are collapsing, are the Penguins. That's got to be incredibly concerning for the coaching staff. And you may be watching this and laughing and saying, Matt, they're not going to be a contender. How could it be even concerning if they already feel like they can see the writing on the wall? I just don't believe these players and coaches are thinking that way. We can think that way. And I know sometimes it is hard to have serious analysis when you feel like this team never really had a shot this year based on the depth. And I thought that they added to the depth up front. I still think they did. But now Brian Rust hurt. We're still waiting on Blake Lizotte to make his Penguins debut. He is skating, but still hasn't played in a black and gold uniform. Michael Bunting has fallen off a cliff here. He's on the 4th line. He's the most action he's getting is serving penalties for delay of game and things that he didn't do just so he can get out of the box because he's not going to kill penalties. And, he hasn't done much at even strength or on the power play either. So I suppose you can at least get him involved in that way. So Bunting's been a big disappointment. Anthony Beauvillier now bumped down off the first line, I think appropriately. Like I said, I didn't mind the combination of Malkin and Crosby. In fact, it makes a lot of sense. If you're trying to at least have one line that's consistent threat, I think that's the way to go at the moment, especially with Sidney Crosby still in a funk. Although tonight, I thought I saw some signs of life. I don't know what you thought about it while watching at home or perhaps even at the game. But Sid with 3 points, and I think that was indicative of how well he played. He looked more determined, looked like he was energized by the pairing with Gino and Ricard Raquel as well. Of course, Raquel, lest we forget, scored a couple of goals. Valtteri Puustinen, way back in the first period, scored his first goal of the season on his first shot. But we haven't seen him get enough scoring chances either. So that depth up front hasn't really shown through. Kevin Hayes had a couple of rough moments tonight, took a weird penalty when the blade of his stick got stuck in the skate of one of the Wild players. He also got beat badly by former Penguin Frederick Gaudreau on the tying goal late in the first period. Gaudreau, a much smaller man than Kevin Hayes, and he was in position, and he just got out-muscled, outworked in the slot. So even the guys you're counting on for defense, Lars Eller, who's had a great start to the year, don't get me wrong, but he worked hard tonight. However, he had a key giveaway that led to Gaudreau's second goal, which ended up putting the Wild ahead for good in this game. So even guys like that are making mistakes. And, at least for once, we can say it wasn't on Sid because I thought he played maybe his most uninspired game as a Penguin against the Vancouver Canucks. Actually, you could take a few picks from that road trip. The Winnipeg game was especially bad for Sid, too. I don't know if subconsciously it's setting in for him that this year is going to be a long year, but he certainly is playing like it's going to be a long year. And, of course, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If he doesn't play very well, then it really is going to be an interminable year for the Penguins, who at least thought they could count on Crosby and to a lesser extent Malkin to drive the bus offensively. Erik Karlsson appears to have fallen off a cliff in terms of his quality of play. He wasn't noticeably bad tonight. It was more on guys like Grzelcyk and Pettersson on the back end, I thought, in some defensive areas where guys were left wide open in front of the net. Matt Zuccarello, late in the second period, had about 5 seconds to dust the puck off in front of the goal before he took the shot that fortunately Joel Blomqvist saved. So many lapses you could point to, not just the ones that went in the back of the net for the Wild tonight. A reminder, you can support Pittsburgh Hockey Now if you're watching on Facebook at the moment by sending stars to our account that help us to maintain the most and best hockey content. Also, I want to give a shout on our YouTube channel on National Hockey Now. If you've missed the debriefs from Coach Francis Anzalone, then I suggest you catch up because he's had some excellent X's and O's tactical style breakdowns of where the Penguins are breaking down. Not to be redundant, but I suppose the word fits in a couple of different ways. Also, he had his take on the Tristan Jarry situation. Jarry remains in Wilkes-Barre Scranton. He can be there for up to 2 weeks on this conditioning stint. So, but Francis Anzalone, awesome content there in addition to Dan Kingerski's regular check-ins, Penguins chats, post-game videos. I imagine he might have one tonight after he wraps up his coverage from PPG Paints Arena. Dan was bouncing all over Western Canada. So glad to have him back. As usual, some sort of travel mishap befell him, and he still found a way to get back through to Pittsburgh by way of Atlanta. So good times here as the Penguins do return home. So at least they have that going for them, but they needed to run the table on this 3-game homestand to just get back to NHL 500. And of course, that one at the end of their standings page, the 3-7-1, that's a loss too, and that's a lost point in a game in which they had a late lead at Calgary. So not a lot going right for the Penguins at the moment. And like I said, tonight, a nostalgic night. Maybe there was a hope that it could give the Pens a boost. Instead, it gave the Wild a boost in a way as they come away with now their 5th win in 7 road games. Fantastic start for John Hines' club. And I think it's a club that has some promise, Minnesota. They've got, of course, Kirill Kaprizov gives them a chance every night, but they've got some solid pros on that side, like a Matt Zuccarello, who picked up a goal tonight. Jacob Lauko scored that short side goal against Blomqvist that I was lamenting earlier, but he appears to be a young up-and-comer. Frederick Gaudreau outperforms all my expectations every time I watch him play. I thought the Pens could have maybe tried to find a way to hang on to him, but he left after the 2021 season. But you'll recall he was very serviceable, and then some for the Penguins back then. Eric Sinek remains a good defensive forward. Matt Boldy. There's some new additions as well. Marco Rossi, they're hoping for more from him after he had a tough start to his career health-wise. And, of course, you got Brock Faber, the Rookie of the Year runner-up from last year. And it's Fleury and Gustafsson between the pipes. I think a pretty solid 1-2 combination. So no shame in losing to the Wild, but, again, it's just the losses are piling up already. And you can't always say every night, well, no shame in losing to the Canucks, no shame in losing to the Oilers, no shame in losing to the Jets. They're undefeated, but at some point, you got to get a result that maybe you're not, quote-unquote, supposed to get, and the Penguins haven't really done that this year. The 3 teams they've beaten on the season, a young and still sloppy Montreal team on the road. They, of course, took down Detroit, a team that still struggles defending, and they beat the run-and-gun Sabres, who, to their credit, have been better since they blew that game in Pittsburgh. But even that game took overtime, and it took an extra attacker goal to get the Penguins at least to OT in that one. And that's still the only game in which Sidney Crosby has scored a goal this season. So 11 games in, and you're really reaching for positives. If you're in my position or if you're a fan sitting at home, it's difficult. It really is. And I think they're at least a couple of games behind where I thought they would be. I figured they'd linger around 500. And yes, a short win streak would certainly rectify that. But like I said, now they've got to win their last 2 here at home just to get to 5-7-1 before they head back out on the road. So things are going to be challenging, but the Penguins are not going to be traveling nearly as much in November. So they do have that going for them as well. I wanted to get your thoughts on Fleury as well, because I thought it was weird the last couple of times the Wild or the Blackhawks came in. Fleury reportedly didn't want to play in Pittsburgh. He just finds it that uncomfortable. So I'm glad that he acquiesced and he allowed all of us to see him one more time at PPG Paints Arena. I think his old teammates wanted to see it one more time, even if they're uncomfortable with it. It just speaks to his personality and the quality of person and teammate that he was, because this is pro sports. Guys are ruthless. They're out there looking out for themselves and for their teams. They're not trying to take it easy on anybody, but it just seems like Fleury is different when it comes to this sort of thing. This is the kind of emotion reserved for amateur sports. I'm not putting anybody involved in this situation down, but this is the kind of thing you see in youth sports where you're not wanting to play against your best buddy from the previous year when you're on different teams. It's a real outlier, and it puts truth to the statement that Fleury is just a different cat, and in all the best ways, I think, personality-wise, style of play on the ice. I know I'll miss his occasional freelancing, and I know earlier in his career he got a bad rap for freelancing too much, not having the fundamentals nailed down. But once he got to about age 30, Mike Bales was brought in as goaltending coach about 10 years ago for the Pens, you'll recall. Excuse me. And Bales gave him a foundation that Fleury didn't previously have under former goalie coach Gilles Meloche. And Fleury blossomed from there, if you can pardon the pun, and especially in Las Vegas, winning the Vezina Trophy, being the star, the face of that team before they unceremoniously dumped him. But I guess that's the way the Golden Knights do business. So I'm happy to see Fleury find a late career home in Minnesota, playing, of course, for his old teammate Bill Guerin, who's now the GM with the Wild. So there's some nice symmetry there. And to talk about symmetry, just watching Fleury pull off the mini version of the Secret Service save that he pulled off against Nick Lidstrom in Game 7 back in 2009. He did that in miniature form in a much smaller situation. But again, late in the third period tonight, lunging over to stop Lars Eller. And he also made a similar type save on Chris Letang in the second period when it looked like the Penguins might be ready to take the lead. And instead, Fleury turns him away again, turns away his old teammate Letang a couple of times. In fact, Letang was peppering Fleury, his fellow French-Canadian, this evening. He ended up with 6 shots on goal, plus 1 blocked. So Letang was pushing, but he couldn't get one over the goal line against good old number 29. And here's some comments flying in. Gary Rogers, the Pens are just so awful, terrible. I think the owner is using them as a tax write-off. I don't know if I'd go that far. That's how bad they are. No hope at all. Well, I do agree there's not much hope for a push for the playoffs, I don't think, at the moment. Gary adds, slump is not the word to describe this. I think it's probably the word to describe it. I think slump certainly tells the tale. Let's not act like they're the San Jose Sharks here. They have had moments. They are putting goals on the board, but they're so porous defensively that it's unrealistic to expect them to win more than 1 out of 3 if they play this badly the rest of the way. 6658 asks a good question. Do you think Dubas expected them to be playing this badly? No, I don't. I think he was thinking around 500, just like I was, maybe even a little bit above, because, of course, in the NHL, if you go to overtime, go to shootouts, get some points that way, get some wins that way, it can be somewhat fool's gold, but it can lift your record to a point where at least you're sporting more wins than regulation losses. Uncle Deebs says, Dubas and his plan just totally didn't work out at all. What do you think needs to happen? Coaching change, trades? They just need more assets, I think. They need to move guys who have value. Hate to say it, Lars Eller has been good, but maybe it's time for him to go already. Kevin Hayes, let him build up his trade value. Matt Grzelcyk, see if there's any takers. I'm not sure there's going to be. Anthony Beauvillier, even Ricard Raquel. We'll see if someone wants to take on that contract. For me, it's all on the table because of how poorly this team has played and how they look like they're not even playing for each other. There appears to be a lack of esprit de corps, to use a French term, on a night when a French guy was being honored. So that's my feeling on it. I think trades would be where I would go. And then if the team continues to show no life through the rest of the year, then I think I move on from Sullivan in the offseason. I would have moved on from him a couple of years ago. That was my take at the time. But I don't think there's much value in doing that right now, especially if you do start to dump some of the veterans. I just don't feel like that does much of anything for you. And I think a coaching search will be better left for the offseason when there are more names out there available, perhaps. But if you think that there's someone out there that you want to go grab, like, say, a Jay Woodcroft, for instance, maybe he's the interesting name available, then you could go ahead and pull the trigger right now. But I think that's a big leap from where Tom Werner was, the chairman of the Fenway Sports Group, on opening night, telling reporters at PPG Paints Arena that Mike Sullivan is one of the best coaches in the NHL, and they're fortunate to have him. I just don't know how you get from that to 10 games later, well, we got to fire this guy. And I don't think that's going to happen. And I think Kyle Dubas has a lot of admiration and perhaps fealty toward Mike Sullivan. So I'm still of the mind that a coaching change is a long way off. I hate to do that to folks who are expecting it. And like I said, I would have made the move a couple of years ago. I just felt like things got stale and Sully wasn't adjusting to the aging roster. But as of now, I don't think this is a situation where you look back at Penguins history and say, well, they changed coaches before, 3 of their Stanley Cup championships. Mid-season coaching changes preceded 2 of their Stanley Cup championships. This is not a team that has that kind of a ceiling. I think we can all agree on that. SEAL Team Rick asks, the defense just falling or failing maybe on defending, or many things like turnovers and energy? That's the thing about defense in hockey. It's not all about just defending. It sounds weird to say it that way, but defense starts with responsible puck management and making sure you're not throwing it away in the offensive zone or firing it on goal cheaply. If you're not a team like the Carolina Hurricanes that's always crashing the net looking for a rebound, that's a tough style to play for a full year. Maybe that's actually hurt the Hurricanes in the long run in the playoffs, but I digress on that. But what I'm saying is, unless that's a team-wide strategy and you build your roster for that kind of crash the net attack, you've got to be more cautious with the puck. You can't be tossing it away. You can't be making bad plays at the blue lines, all the stuff you hear the coaches talk about ad nauseum. But there's a reason they do, because turnovers there in the neutral zone lead to transition back, and it makes it difficult to defend. And you're scrambling, and you're trying to sort out the rush and pick out the most dangerous guys flying at your goaltender. So there's a lot to defending. But even tonight, they were in good position on that second wild goal. I keep going back to that one, and Kevin Hayes gets out-muscled by Frederick Gaudreau, who, nice player and all, but he's not exactly a power forward. And he made the move to get around him, found some room in the middle, and snapped the shot past Blomqvist. Maybe you'd like to get a save from your goaltender at a point when it might help momentum, but Blomqvist was really good in the third period, and he's just a rookie. He's just in his first handful of NHL games, so I'm going to give him some leeway. But to answer your question, SEAL Team Rick, it's a combination of things, and that's why I've been hard on Crosby, too, looking like he doesn't want to be there at times. Not tonight, to be clear. I thought he and Malkin and Raquel were the biggest bright spot of the 5-3 loss, but Crosby just making hope passes, and well, he's never exactly been as good defensively as some commentators might have you believe. When he tries really hard, he can be, but also I don't want him to be sacrificing his offensive abilities, his abilities to create chances and set up teammates and score goals himself. So it's entirely reasonable for me for Crosby to focus on the offensive end, but when he's just coughing the puck up left and right, then you got to have more effort coming back, and that game in Vancouver was especially ugly in that regard. So it's not just on the defense. It's not just about defending in your own end. It's on the forwards as well. It's on puck management. It's on being smart and realizing that you're a team that's not a burner team anymore. You're not a team that's one of the fastest in the league. I'm not sure the Penguins are necessarily slow, and they've added some speed this year, but they're not one of the fastest teams. So they have to be more judicious with what they do with the puck. We saw it again tonight. Lars Eller making a costly giveaway at his own blue line, or pardon me, at the opposing blue line. And then Gaudreau scores the breakaway goal and the Wild lead, and they never look back. One last comment here as we're close to, quarter after the hour? Just past a quarter after the hour on the East Coast. Peter P. says, Fenway, dump Dubas. I don't think that's happening either. They just hired him a little bit less than a year ago. So I just don't believe that management changes are upcoming for the Penguins. That's my take on that. I think it's going to be more about stripping the roster down to the studs, perhaps. If this team doesn't get a couple of wins soon, if they continue to sink, then Dubas has no choice but to completely pull the plug on any kind of competitive aspirations for this season. Okay, my name is Matt Gajtka, and let me just pull down that banner for you so you can see my handle on social media, MattGajtka. I'm on X. I am on Facebook at Matt Gajtka Media. Also on Instagram every once in a while. And I will note, I did buy the blue check mark on X. I bit the bullet and decided to pay Elon Musk my $84 for the year. And got to say, my engagement is way up. People are replying to what I'm putting out there, which I have over 10,000 followers. It was confusing as to why I wasn't getting anybody responding to me. It's like, am I this lame now? Well, maybe that is the case, but I happen to think that I'd at least be running into some more people out there and getting some more conversations going. So in the week since I paid for X Premium, I have certainly seen an uptick in engagement over there and interaction. So that's been fun. It's felt a little bit like old times. Unfortunately, now you have to pay for that sort of thing on X. Anyway, neither here nor there. We've reached the half-hour mark on Penguins Postgame. Our next show coming up Thursday, the Anaheim Ducks, who just won tonight, actually. In fact, on the road at New York, and played that was at the Islanders, I should say. They played the Rangers tight over the weekend, too. this is not a pushover Ducks team anymore, especially if Lucas Dostal plays in net. So, again, the way the Penguins are playing, every night's a tough assignment. This one's not going to be the rollover Ducks that we've seen in recent years. At least I don't think so, unless they come out and just drop a stinker at PPG Paints. That's on Thursday at 7 o'clock. Immediately after the final buzzer, I'll be with you right here on the National Hockey Now YouTube channel. Remember to like and subscribe, and also like and follow Pittsburgh Hockey Now on Facebook, where this has been streaming simultaneously and after the fact. Matt Gajtka, thanks again to Dan Kingerski for the tech support, getting all this set up a couple of weeks ago. Now rolling with it here, and glad to bring you Penguins post-game shows on at least a semi-regular basis throughout the 2024-25 season. Talk to you next time.